In the quiet before Olympus, before Zeus's thunder, there was a titan who ruled the cosmos with a heart forged in fear, Kronos, the father of time. He swallowed his children whole, believing he could silence prophecy itself. Yet destiny, patient and watchful, never sleeps. His reign of golden terror stands between creation and collapse, a secret history buried beneath the marble myths of Greece. Tonight, we drift into that ancient silence, to hear the rise, the dread, and the fall of the god who devoured time itself. Before all names, before all stars, there was only chaos, a whispering emptiness without sky, without earth, without sound. It was not darkness, but a deep stillness, the kind that waits before creation takes its first breath. From that nothingness, Gaia, the earth, stirred awake. She rose from the void like a mother from sleep, her body forming mountains, her breath giving birth to air. And above her came Uranus, the sky, vast, radiant, infinite. When his gaze met hers, the world took shape between them. From their union came the first generation of divine children. The Titans, each one vast, each one eternal. Yet the most cunning among them was their youngest son, Kronos. Kronos watched the world unfold with quiet, calculating eyes. He saw how Uranus feared his own children, how the sky pressed heavily upon Gaia, burying their offspring deep within her body so they would never rise. Gaia cried out in pain, her grief echoing across the heavens. But Uranus would not listen. It was then that the earth herself began to plot. From the stone and blood of her body, she forged a sickle of divine metal, a blade curved like the crescent moon. With trembling hands, she called her children and whispered, "One of you must set me free." The Titans looked away. Fear hung in the air like smoke. None dared to raise a weapon against their father, none except Kronos. He stepped forward, silent and fearless, his eyes cold and sure. "I will do it," he said, and even Gaia seemed to hesitate at the sound of his voice. That night, as the heavens turned in silence, the young Titan hid in the shadows. The stars above watched, knowing that the act to come would divide eternity in two before and after. Kronos gripped the sickle, feeling its weight hum with destiny. He was not driven by rage nor justice, but something sharper, the hunger to rule. And when Uranus descended once more to embrace Gaia, the young Titan struck. The sky screamed, the earth shook, the world turned red beneath the first act of divine rebellion. From that wound in the heavens, blood spilled upon the earth, birthing strange and eternal beings. The Erinyes, spirits of vengeance, and from the foam of the sea, the goddess Aphrodite. The cosmos had changed forever. As Uranus fell, his final words became a curse. "Your son will betray you, as you have betrayed me." Kronos wiped the blade clean. The stars dimmed. The sky grew silent. He had freed his mother, but unknowingly inherited his father's curse. And somewhere in the stillness, time began. In the wake of Uranus's fall, silence ruled the heavens, the first true silence since creation began. But it was not the silence of peace. It was the pause between two storms. The cosmos trembled, unsure whether to celebrate or mourn. From Gaia's trembling body emerged her long-buried children. The Titans, 12 in all, each colossal and radiant, their forms sculpted from the elements themselves. There was Oceanus, endless as the sea; Hyperion, the blazing light; Thea, who gleamed like dawn; Iapetus, stern and unyielding; and Rhea, whose heart shone with compassion. Among them stood Kronos, the youngest, his eyes reflecting the faint shimmer of the sickle still wet with his father's blood. Gaia rose, her face serene yet marked by sorrow. "My children are free," she whispered, "and so the world shall know balance again." The Titans gathered around her, awed by their new freedom, while above them the stars hung heavy with possibility. Yet even as they celebrated, the old blood still smoked upon the soil. It soaked into the earth and sea, spreading like ink through the veins of creation. And from that divine essence, new life began to stir. The monstrous giants roared to existence, their laughter shaking the mountains. From the foam where Uranus's power fell, a goddess formed, Aphrodite, luminous and serene. Life, death, beauty, and vengeance had been born from the same act of defiance. Kronos watched it all unfold. He was a liberator, but deep inside, a shadow began to coil, the voice of his father's curse. You too will be betrayed by your own blood. Still, Gaia crowned him king among the Titans. Rule wisely, my son, she said. Let harmony reign in the age you will build. But harmony and power rarely share the same throne. Kronos built his palace upon Mount Othries, the heart of the Titan realm. His brothers and sisters became his council, each governing a domain. Hyperion watched the sun, Oceanus the rivers, Rhea the seasons. For a while, balance seemed possible. Mortals, still in their infancy, walked the earth without hunger or war. Trees bore fruit without asking. Rivers ran clear, and even time itself felt slow, gentle, forgiving. This was the dawn of what poets would later call the Golden Age, an era when gods walked among men and the world itself breathed peace. Yet even in that perfection, Kronos' eyes drifted often toward the horizon, the place where the heavens met the unknown. There, he imagined the faint shimmer of his father's eyes in the dark beyond the stars, watching. Each night, he dreamt of a child's cry echoing through eternity, followed by his own scream. He would wake to silence, but the feeling lingered. A future he could not see but already feared. Rhea noticed the change first. My love, she said one evening, the world is at peace. Why do you still listen for war? Kronos smiled faintly, hiding the tremor in his voice. Because time itself remembers, he whispered, and I am its keeper. The gods feasted that night, unaware that a storm had already begun to turn within their king, one that would devour heaven itself. The new world pulsed with light. Rivers glimmered like veins of silver. The mountains hummed with divine life, and the Titans walked freely beneath an open sky for the first time. Yet even in his newfound throne, Kronos could not escape the ghost of the father he had dethroned. The air itself seemed to remember Uranus's cry, that thunderous curse that promised the sun would one day suffer the same fate. At first, Kronos dismissed it. He was the ruler of the cosmos now, master of time itself. The Titans obeyed him, mortals worshipped him, and the heavens bowed. But shadows have long memories, and curses are patient things. From beyond the horizon, the broken remnants of Uranus's essence drifted across the night. The stars whispered to one another, carrying the echo of their fallen father's grief. Some said they saw the sky god's spirit lingering above the firmament, watching, waiting, and deep below, Gaia stirred again. Her triumph had soured. She had given her son power to free her from oppression, but now she saw the same cold distance in his eyes that once haunted Uranus. The earth trembled when Kronos passed. Rivers bent their flow toward him, obeying without question. Gaia's joy turned to unease. She wondered if she had merely traded one tyrant for another. In her dreams, she saw the future unfold like a cracked mirror, reflections of endless repetition. Fathers devouring sons, sons rising to overthrow them, the wheel of power turning again and again. When she woke, the wind carried Uranus's final words like a knife through the leaves. He will be betrayed by his own blood. Kronos, though outwardly calm, could feel it too, the weight of destiny pressing against him. Every celebration, every offering, every word of praise sounded hollow when he heard that whisper underneath. Your children will destroy you. He began to rule not through love, but through control. The Golden Age still glittered on the surface. Harvests flourished, mortals sang, and the other Titans basked in peace. But beneath it all, fear began to settle like dust. Rhea, his wife and sister, watched quietly. She saw the way Kronos' hand tightened around his throne, how his gaze turned often toward the horizon, searching for enemies that did not yet exist. You have conquered the sky, she said one evening, her voice soft as dusk. But why do you still look upward, as though it might fall again? Kronos turned away. Because I know, he murmured, that what is above always seeks to return. It was then that Gaia came to him once more. not as a mother, but as a warning. The ground split where she walked, her eyes burning with ancient grief. "You have done what no god dared," she said. "You ended the tyranny of heaven. But mark my words, my son. Every act of liberation carries the seed of the next rebellion." Kronos said nothing. He only stared at the sickle, the same curved blade that had spilled his father's power. Its edge gleamed faintly under the starlight, and for the first time, he saw his own reflection upon it. He could not know then that this image, the ruler gazing upon his weapon, would become prophecy's first fulfillment. As Gaia vanished into the depths of the earth, her voice lingered in the wind. "You have freed me from the sky, but one day, one of your own will free the world from you." That night, Kronos stood atop Mount Othries, watching the constellations turn. The stars above seemed to form eyes, countless, unblinking, watching him as he once watched his father. He lifted his hand and whispered to the heavens, "If destiny cannot be destroyed, then I shall devour it." Below, the world slept in peace. Above, the curse of Uranus waited, patient as time itself. The world that followed Uranus's fall shimmered with promise. Mountains no longer groaned under the weight of tyranny. Rivers sang with freedom, and the heavens above seemed calmer, as though exhaling after centuries of tension. This was the dawn of the Golden Age, the time of Kronos the king. The Titans, newly crowned, took their thrones beside him upon Mount Othries. The air was heavy with divinity, light spilling from Hyperion's chariot, Oceanus weaving the tides of creation, and Rhea nurturing the life that bloomed endlessly across Gaia's green skin. Mortals lived without need or toil. They neither farmed nor fought. The earth itself fed them, and their days drifted by like gentle clouds across an eternal summer. And at the center of this perfection sat Kronos, his scythe buried deep in the roots of the mountain, his crown gleaming like a fragment of the sun. To the mortal world, he was a god of generosity, calm, wise, and fair. They built temples to him and sang hymns of gratitude. Yet behind his serene eyes, the memory of his father's curse still whispered, "Your son will destroy you." At first, he resisted the thought. The world was his now, his to mold, his to protect. But as eons passed and the stars spun endlessly above him, the whisper grew louder. He began to notice the passage of things. A leaf falling before its time, a wave receding faster than it came. Time itself had started to move, and though Kronos ruled over it, he could feel it slipping through his fingers like sand. That realization became his torment, for Kronos understood what few gods dared to admit. That time, even for the divine, meant change, and change always carries loss. Rhea often found him awake through the eternal dusk, staring at the horizon. "You created harmony," she told him softly. "You gave peace to gods and mortals alike. Why does your heart still ache?" Kronos answered without turning his gaze. "Because I know peace is only the quiet before something new begins." And he was right, for even in the calmest heavens, the seeds of storm lie sleeping. The other Titans noticed the shift. Iapetus whispered that their king's eyes had grown colder. Thea saw him watching the stars with a hunger that made her uneasy. Hyperion claimed to see shadows moving in his light. Yet none dared question the ruler of all creation. Still, fate crept closer, unseen, unstoppable. One day, as the world glowed beneath a golden dawn, Gaia herself appeared again, her form rising from the meadows like mist. Her voice, soft yet vast, rippled through the air. "My son," she said, "I have come bearing a truth you must face." Kronos turned, wary. "Have I not already faced my destiny once, mother? What more could the future hold that I should fear?" Gaia's eyes dimmed. "The same curse that once chained your father now coils around you. Beware, Kronos, for one of your own children shall one day rise and cast you down, as you once cast down Uranus." The words struck like thunder. The grass around them withered. The air stilled. Kronos stared at his mother, disbelief hardening into fury. "No," he said quietly. "I have ended that chain." But Gaia only sighed, a sound that carried sorrow older than the stars. "Time cannot be ended, my son, only continued." She vanished into the wind, leaving Kronos standing alone amid the silence of eternity. From that moment, the Titan King's peace began to rot. His smiles became masks, his generosity sharpened by suspicion. He watched the world and his queen with eyes that no longer saw beauty, only danger. The Golden Age would endure for many more centuries, but beneath its radiance, a shadow had begun to stir. A shadow born not from cruelty, but from fear. And in fear, even gods can become monsters. The prophecy echoed through Kronos' mind like the tolling of a distant bell, soft, persistent, impossible to ignore. One of your own will overthrow you. At first, he had dismissed it as an echo of Gaia's sorrow, a remnant of the ancient curse that bound all fathers to the fate of their sons. But with each passing century, those words grew sharper, cutting into his peace like a hidden blade. The Golden Age still gleamed on the surface, but in the quiet corners of Kronos' mind, suspicion began to bloom like rot beneath gold leaf. He started to see danger in the smallest things, the way Rhea cradled her swelling belly with hope in her eyes, the laughter of the Titan's children, even the rhythmic pulse of the earth. Everything whispered the same message: the future is coming, and the future could not be controlled. One night, as the constellations turned above Mount Othrys, Kronos descended to the temple of Ananke, the goddess of inevitability. There, in the dim glow of eternal flame, he demanded an answer. "Tell me," he said, his voice trembling with restrained fury, "can prophecy be undone?" The goddess did not raise her head. "Prophecy is not undone," she murmured. "It is fulfilled in the manner most feared." Her words struck him harder than any weapon. Kronos clenched his fists until blood darkened his palms. "Then I shall make time itself my weapon," he whispered. "If destiny cannot be stopped, I will devour it before it devours me." From that moment, his reign turned inward, no longer the benevolent rule of a golden god, but the cautious governance of one who feared his own reflection. The Titans felt it. Rhea felt it most. The man she loved, once patient and wise, now spoke less, slept rarely, and watched her as if searching for betrayal in her eyes. When her first child was born, Hestia, radiant as the dawn, Kronos' heart trembled. For a moment he saw only beauty, the continuation of all he had built. But then, in the child's cry, he heard his father's curse again. A voice in his mind whispered, "It begins!" That night, while Rhea slept, Kronos crept to the cradle. His hand hovered above his daughter, shaking. He could feel her warmth, innocent, divine, alive. His jaw clenched. "I am sorry," he whispered, as if apology could erase destiny. Then, with a single motion, he swallowed her whole. The earth shuddered. The stars dimmed. The silence that followed was unbearable. When Rhea awoke and saw the empty cradle, her scream cracked the sky. But Kronos only turned away, his face stone. "It must be done," he said. "The curse will not claim me." The years that followed bled together. Each time Rhea gave birth, hope flickered, and each time, Kronos extinguished it. Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon. One by one, he swallowed them all, each act easier than the last. And yet, instead of easing his fear, it deepened it. The more he consumed, the more the curse grew inside him. Rhea's grief curdled into defiance. She began to avoid his gaze, to hide her sorrow beneath silence. Even the other Titans turned away, unwilling to challenge their king. The once radiant halls of Mount Othrys darkened. The Golden Age was no longer golden. Still, Kronos convinced himself he had triumphed. "No child remains," he said to the wind, to the ghosts of prophecy. "Time bends to my will." But Gaia, unseen, watched from below, and Rhea, her daughter, listened to her whispers in secret. For there was one truth Kronos had never understood. No god, however mighty, can swallow destiny. It moves through the cracks, through the smallest acts of love, through a mother's heart still brave enough to hope. And Rhea's heart had not yet broken. By the time Rhea's sixth child stirred within her, The golden age had grown eerily quiet. The songs of mortals had faded, replaced by whispers of dread. Even the rivers, once joyous under Kronos' rule, seemed to run slower, as if the very flow of time hesitated under the weight of its master's fear. High atop Mount Othries, the Titan King sat alone upon his throne of stone and gold, the light of eternity flickering faintly across his face. Around him, the world was perfect. Yet in that perfection he found no comfort, for in his heart he carried a secret hunger, a curse disguised as control. Each child he had devoured still lived within him, their divine essence echoing faintly in the silence of his body. He could feel their warmth, their struggle, their cries swallowed by eternity. But it was not guilt that haunted him. It was the thought that somehow, even within him, they might one day rise again. Rhea had watched this madness take root in the man she once loved. The gentle ruler who brought light to the world was gone, replaced by a god who stared into the shadows, waiting for them to move. She tried to reason with him. "Kronos," she said one night, her voice trembling, "you rule the heavens, the earth, and time itself. Must you rule your own blood as well?" He turned to her slowly, eyes hollow, voice calm but sharp as the edge of his sickle. "If I do not, the curse will rule me." And so, when the sixth child was born, Rhea wept before even holding him. Her tears fell upon the infant's face like blessings denied. The child, Poseidon, cooed softly, unaware of the fate awaiting him. Rhea begged for mercy, clinging to her husband's arm, but Kronos had already decided. With trembling hands, he lifted the baby, his own flesh and blood, and devoured him whole. The world shuddered. The sea roared as though mourning its lost god. That night, Rhea wandered alone across the mountains, her grief echoing louder than the wind. She knelt beside a spring and looked into its reflection, not at her face, but at the ghost of what the world had become. The reflection shimmered, and from its depths rose the faint shape of her mother, Gaia, ancient and sorrowful. "My daughter," the earth whispered, "your husband has become the thing he feared." Rhea's eyes burned with tears. "Then tell me, mother, how does one defy time itself?" Gaia's smile was faint, but knowing. "Time may devour all things," she said, "but love creates what it cannot touch." It was then Rhea understood. She could not fight Kronos with power, only with cunning. And in that realization, a spark of rebellion flared within her heart. Meanwhile, Kronos sat in his great hall, haunted by the silence of victory. The titans around him pretended loyalty, but even they had begun to avoid his gaze. Rumors spread in hushed voices, of a king who ate his heirs, of a god who feared his own blood. The very air around him thickened with tension, as if the universe itself recoiled from his rule. Still, Kronos convinced himself he was safe. "The future is mine," he murmured to the empty chamber. "I have conquered what even prophecy could not." But in the quiet darkness of her chamber, Rhea placed her hand upon her stomach once more. Another life stirred within her, one that would soon change the fate of the cosmos. And for the first time in ages, she smiled, because deep in her heart, she already knew this child would not be devoured. The world had grown quiet beneath Kronos' rule, too quiet. The laughter of the Titan's children had faded into myth, the golden age dimmed by the echo of swallowed cries. Yet within Rhea's heart, a spark still glowed, a spark the Titan King could neither see nor destroy, for she was once again with child. This time, the air itself seemed to tremble differently. The wind that swept across Mount Othries carried both warning and promise. Even the stars shimmered in strange patterns, as if whispering to each other about the coming birth. Rhea knew this child was not like the others. This one was fate's answer, the final move in a game Kronos thought he had already won. When the time of birth drew near, Rhea could no longer bear the dread that haunted her palace. She fled under cover of darkness, her footsteps silent upon the earth. Through forests that remembered creation and mountains older than memory, she sought refuge, not in heaven, but in the womb of the world itself. There, deep in the land of Crete, She found sanctuary in a hidden cave on Mount Ida, where no Titan's eyes could follow. The air was thick with magic. The ground pulsed softly with Gaia's presence. It was here, beneath the watch of sacred nymphs and the eternal hum of the earth, that Rhea gave birth to her sixth son Zeus. The child was small, yet his cry filled the cave like thunder. It was not the sound of weakness, but of inevitability. Rhea looked into his eyes and saw something both ancient and new, the calm before a storm that would one day shake heaven itself. But she knew Kronos would come. He always did. So she turned once more to her mother, Gaia, whose voice rose from the soil around her. "Mother," she whispered, "how can I save him?" And Gaia, ancient and weary, answered, "Hide him where the sound of his voice becomes the song of creation. Let his cry be drowned by the drums of destiny." Rhea understood. She wrapped the infant Zeus in soft linen and kissed his forehead. Then she took a smooth stone, roughly the size of a newborn, and swaddled it in cloth. It was a cruel trick, but only deception could outwit time itself. When she returned to Mount Othrys, Kronos was waiting. His eyes, dark and patient, searched her face. "Another child?" he asked, his voice like iron dragged across stone. Rhea nodded, her heart pounding. "Yes," she whispered, offering the bundle in trembling hands. Kronos smiled faintly, a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Then let the curse end here." And without another word, he swallowed the stone whole. Rhea turned away as the sound echoed through the chamber, a sound that marked both loss and liberation. She wanted to scream, but she did not. For the first time, she felt a terrible, silent strength. Kronos had consumed nothing but illusion, while the true air of heaven slept safely beneath the beating heart of the earth. Far away in the cave, the infant Zeus stirred. Around him, nymphs gathered: Amalthea, who nursed him with milk from her sacred goat, and Adrastea, who danced with bronze shields to mask his cries from Kronos' ears. Even the bees of Crete brought him honey, sweet as destiny itself. Time moved differently there. The world above continued under Kronos' dark peace, unaware that its undoing had already begun. The Titan believed himself eternal. Rhea let him believe it. But deep beneath the mountain, the child of thunder dreamed, dreams filled with storms and the sound of chains breaking. The future stirred in his small hands. And as Rhea stood upon a lonely ridge, staring toward Othrys, she whispered to the wind, "He is coming." The air itself seemed to shiver at her words. Somewhere in the distance, the first faint rumble of thunder answered. The god of time had swallowed his own end. Beneath the emerald slopes of Mount Ida, hidden from the eyes of gods and titans alike, a cave pulsed with a heartbeat older than time. It was there that the infant Zeus drew his first breaths of freedom. Outside, the world moved beneath Kronos' silent rule. But inside this hollow of the earth, destiny was quietly taking shape. The cave was no ordinary refuge, it was alive. The walls shimmered faintly, veins of crystal glowing with the warmth of Gaia's spirit. Streams ran with sweet water that never ran dry, and the air hummed with divine protection. Rhea had left her son there under the care of Amalthea, a gentle nymph whose laughter could soothe even the wildest storm. With her lived Adrastea, fierce and clever, and the armored spirits called Curides, whose rhythmic dance would soon drown the cry of a god. From the first moment, they knew this child was no mere infant. His eyes, deep and golden, followed the flicker of torchlight with uncanny awareness. When he slept, the cave itself seemed to breathe in rhythm with him. When he cried, the winds outside stirred as though the mountain itself sought to calm him. But every sound was a danger, for above the mountain, Kronos' spies roamed, spirits of wind and shadow who carried his paranoia like a scent. To protect the boy, the Curides struck their shields and swords together in thunderous rhythm, chanting battle songs that echoed across the hills. The clash of bronze became both cradle and disguise, their music a veil between life and annihilation. Amalthea fed the child from the milk of her sacred goat, and from its horns poured ambrosia, glowing with divine light. Bees, summoned by Adrastea's whisper, brought honey so pure it glimmered like sunlight trapped in amber. Zeus thrived, his laughter stronger, his eyes brighter. In that laughter, the nymphs felt something the world had forgotten. Hope. As years passed, the boy grew swiftly. His small hands reached for the light that streamed through cracks in the cave ceiling, fascinated by its movement. "You reach for the sky," Amalthea told him once, smiling. "Perhaps one day it will answer." Zeus would spend his nights watching the stars beyond the fissures of the cave, their slow turning teaching him the rhythm of the cosmos. He did not yet know who he was, but somewhere deep in his heart, he could feel the pull of destiny, a tension between silence and thunder, between the hidden and the divine. One day, while chasing a beam of light, Zeus stumbled upon an ancient carving etched into the stone. The image of a sickle, curved and sharp, surrounded by chained stars. When he touched it, the cave seemed to tremble. He pulled back, frightened, but the echo of a voice, faint and far, rippled through the air. It was not words, but feeling, sorrow, defiance, warning. He would not understand it until much later, when he learned whose blade it was. Years in the cave taught Zeus patience, the first lesson of the gods. But patience is not the same as peace. Often he would dream of a man cloaked in shadow, eyes cold as marble, a mouth that opened like a pit to swallow the world. He would wake gasping, his heart pounding like distant thunder. Amalthea would hush him, pressing her hand to his cheek. "The world cannot see you yet, little one," she would whisper. "But it will." Outside, storms gathered more often. The Titans muttered among themselves, and even the air near Mount Othries grew heavy. Rhea felt the change too. Though Kronos still believed himself secure, there were nights when she saw him start awake, clutching his chest as if something within him stirred. Something did, for the 6 souls he had swallowed had begun to shift. The divine essence of his children pulsed inside him, restless, waiting for the one who could free them. Back in the cave, Zeus stood at the mouth of the mountain for the first time. The sky stretched endless above him, the wind cool and sharp. Amalthea called out, "Don't wander too far," but he only smiled. He didn't know yet what the horizon meant, only that it called to him. The boy who had been hidden from time was beginning to hear the voice of destiny. And somewhere in the heavens, a distant tremor answered him, like the slow drawing of a storm's first breath. Years passed like quiet waves breaking against eternity. The child hidden in the cave of Crete was no longer a helpless infant. He had become Zeus, bright-eyed, broad-shouldered, and restless. The nymphs who raised him began to notice the same trait that had once glimmered in Kronos' eyes. Not cruelty, but curiosity, the hunger to know what lay beyond what was permitted. Every day, Zeus would climb to the mouth of the cave, where the sun painted the sea in molten gold. He would sit there, silent, listening to the wind whisper secrets from the world above, of gods who ruled in fear, of a sky that longed to roar again. In those whispers, he began to feel something stirring deep inside him, a force he could neither name nor contain. One evening, as the shadows lengthened, Métis, a goddess of deep wisdom and daughter of Oceanus, appeared before him. Her presence was soft yet sharp, like moonlight reflected on steel. "You have been hidden long enough," she said. "The world trembles under your father's silence. Do you not feel it?" Zeus nodded slowly. "I dream of it," he admitted. "A throne built on fear, a voice that devours the cries of its own blood." Métis smiled faintly. "Then you already know your purpose." Zeus turned away. "Purpose," he repeated, tasting the word like fire. "If I was born to destroy my father, does that make me just another shadow of him?" Métis's eyes gleamed. "No. You were born not to destroy time, but to set it free." From that moment, the rebellion took root, not with armies or violence, but with understanding. Zeus began to seek allies among the gods who still remembered compassion. In secret, Métis led him to the far reaches of the sea, where Oceanus ruled, the only Titan who had refused to follow Kronos into fear. The old god received Zeus with a look that was both sorrow and hope. "I knew this day would come," said Oceanus. "The wheel turns for all, even for kings. He placed his hand upon Zeus's shoulder. If you are to face him, you must first know what he is made of. And so, Oceanus told him everything, of Kronos' rise, his scythe, his curse, and the swallowing of his own children. Each word fell like a hammer against Zeus's heart. By the end, his hands were clenched into fists. "They are not dead," Oceanus said softly, "merely trapped within him, still alive, still divine." That night, Zeus stood alone at the edge of the sea. The stars shimmered above him, bright and watchful. He thought of his siblings, of voices silenced before they could speak, of love turned to hunger. A strange calm filled him. "If time devours all," he whispered, "then I will make it choke." From the darkness came the faint sound of wings. Hermes, still a young and elusive spirit, landed before him with a sly grin. "Word travels fast," he said. "Even time can't keep secrets forever." "Then help me spread the truth," Zeus replied. And so, across the heavens, quiet ripples began to form. The Cyclopes, imprisoned deep within Tartarus, felt a stirring of hope. The Centimanes, the hundred-handed giants once buried by Uranus and forgotten by Kronos, began to shift in their chains. Whispers of rebellion flowed through every corner of the cosmos. But rebellion, like a seed, requires patience. Métis warned him, "To strike too early is to lose everything. To strike too late is to lose yourself." So Zeus waited. He watched. He learned. He studied how mortals prayed, how faith, not power, sustained them. He listened to the rhythm of storms, to the beating heart of the earth. He realized that to rule was not to consume but to balance, to give and take as the world itself did. Still, as the years passed, the pull of destiny grew heavier. Sometimes he could almost hear his father's breath in the wind, smell the metallic scent of the sickle that once cut the sky. And somewhere deep within his blood, the echo of that ancient curse still lingered. The son shall replace the father. Zeus lifted his eyes to the stars, his voice barely above a whisper. "If I must end him, then let it not be for power but for peace." A flash of lightning, faint but real, shimmered across the sea. The first spark of Olympus had been born, and though Kronos still ruled from his mountain of silence, far below, the world had begun to move again. The night before destiny first turned its face toward war, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Zeus stood upon a cliff overlooking the Aegean, the wind whipping through his hair like restless spirits. In the distance, the constellations shimmered, silent witnesses to the storm about to begin. Yet Zeus did not move. He was waiting for her. From the shadows of the sea rose Métis, radiant and unhurried. The moon caught in her hair, and her eyes held the calm of one who knew both fate and its loopholes. "You've grown," she said softly, "and so has your father's fear. The world trembles under the weight of his paranoia." Zeus turned toward her. "He devoured everything, even the future. How do you fight a god who has swallowed time?" Métis smiled faintly. "Not with strength," she said. "With cunning. You must make time undo itself." She stepped closer, and in her hand appeared a vial of liquid light, a potion that shimmered like molten gold. "This," she explained, "is born from the waters of Lethe and the roots of Mnemosyne, the river of forgetting and the river of memory. Mixed together, they awaken what is hidden. When Kronos drinks it, he will remember what he has buried, and bring it forth." Zeus studied the vial, its glow reflected in his eyes. "He will know it's me," he said quietly. "Not if you approach him as what he least expects, a servant," Métis replied. "Disguise yourself in humility. Let pride blind him. Let fear make him careless." He nodded. "And when he releases them, then your war begins," she said simply. But she saw hesitation in him. The boy who had been hidden all his life now faced the god who had devoured his family. "You are afraid," she said softly. Zeus didn't deny it. "He is my father." Métis's voice gentled. "So was Uranus to him. Fear is the heritage of gods, but wisdom is their rebellion." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of lightning. Zeus looked toward the horizon. Somewhere far away, Mount Othrys loomed beneath a curtain of stars. He could almost hear Kronos' voice, calm, regal, certain, echoing through the night. "Tell me one thing," Zeus said. "If prophecy cannot be stopped, why does it test us at all?" Métis tilted her head. "Because prophecy is not punishment," she whispered. "It is revelation. What you do with it is your measure." She handed him the vial. "Go. The world has been patient long enough." And with that, she vanished into the sea, leaving only ripples of light behind her. Zeus stood there for a long time, the potion warm in his hand. Above him, thunder rolled gently, not as warning, but as welcome. The sound filled his chest like memory. By dawn, he was gone. He descended from Crete cloaked in mortal form, a humble wanderer with eyes that hid galaxies. When he reached Kronos' palace, the halls of Mount Othrys gleamed cold and empty. The once living laughter of titans had faded to formal silence. Time had become a prison, precise, eternal, and joyless. Kronos sat upon his throne, robed in gold, his expression carved from stone. His power filled the chamber like a suffocating fog. When the stranger bowed before him, the Titan's eyes flickered with mild curiosity. "Who are you?" he demanded. Zeus lowered his gaze. "A servant, my lord," he said, "a bringer of wine and blessing." Kronos laughed softly, a sound colder than wind through marble. "Wine and blessing," he repeated. "Tell me, what blessing does time require?" Zeus poured the potion into a golden cup, bowing low. "The kind that soothes what even time cannot silence. Pride is the oldest blindness." Kronos raised the cup without hesitation, the glow of the liquid reflecting in his eyes. He drank deeply. For a moment all was still. Then the world shifted. Kronos' breath caught. His eyes widened in horror as fire burned through his veins. He felt it first in his chest, a pressure rising, an ache too vast for his immortal form to contain. A deep, guttural cry tore from his throat. The titans nearby fled as the air filled with blinding light. And then, from within him, voices, cries, names: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon. The swallowed gods returned, their forms blazing with fury and renewal. The earth quaked as the sons and daughters of Kronos burst forth from the prison of their father's fear. Zeus stepped back, the storm gathering behind his eyes. Time had just undone itself. The halls of Mount Othrys convulsed. Marble split, pillars groaned, and the golden tapestries that once symbolized eternity burned under the weight of what was awakening. For the first time since the dawn of the world, Kronos screamed. The Titan King, the father of time, the one who had devoured prophecy itself, now felt his own curse turning inward. His body, vast and divine, heaved as if the universe itself were rejecting him. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone and fire. Zeus stood before him in silence, his mortal disguise falling away like smoke. Lightning flickered across his skin, illuminating the truth of who he was. The long-hidden sun had returned, not as a child, but as destiny incarnate. Kronos staggered, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You," he rasped, his voice cracking the air, "you should not exist." Zeus said nothing. He only watched as the potion of Métis did its work, the rivers of Lethe and Mnemosyne churning inside the Titan's stomach, forcing memory and creation into violent collision. Then came the first sound, a sharp cry, followed by light. From within Kronos' chest erupted Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, her radiance flickering like reborn flame. She fell to the ground, trembling, her body steaming with divine energy. Kronos roared, clawing at himself as the next emerged. Demeter, her form wrapped in golden wheat, her eyes glowing with the sorrow of endless harvests. Then Hera, proud and regal, bursting forth like a thunderclap, her first breath a vow of vengeance. Hades followed, cloaked in shadow, his gaze deep and cold as the realms he would one day command. And finally, Poseidon, born again with the crash of waves, his trident forming from the tears that poured from his father's agony. The very mountain shook with their return. The children of Kronos, devoured, forgotten, buried in fear, now stood free once more. When it was done, Kronos fell to his knees. Steam rose from his body. The air smelled of salt, smoke, and destiny. He looked up at Zeus, whose eyes burned with stormlight. "You've undone the balance," the Titan hissed. "You've unmade perfection." Zeus stepped closer. "You mistook stillness for peace," he said. "You called silence safety, but the world must move, Father. Time must breathe." Kronos tried to rise, but his strength faltered. For the first time, the god of time felt something he had never known: age. His limbs shook beneath him. His heartbeat echoed weakly across the cosmos. The freed gods gathered around Zeus, their faces still pale with the memory of darkness. Hera was the first to speak. "You are the reason we suffered," she said to her father. "And yet, it was your fear that created us anew." Poseidon's voice followed, rumbling like the sea. "You sought to stop the future, but all you did was summon it." Kronos' gaze shifted from one to the next. His children, his legacy, his undoing. "Then finish it," he whispered. "Be what prophecy made you." But Zeus only shook his head. "No," he said softly. "Not yet. Time must see its own reflection before it ends." He turned to his siblings. "Gather your strength," he told them. "Our father's fall is not yet complete. His loyal titans will rise to defend him, and when they do, the heavens will burn." The newly freed gods looked to one another, the truth of it sinking deep. This was not the end. It was the beginning of the greatest war creation would ever know. Kronos slumped against his throne, his breath ragged, his eyes, still vast and ancient, fixed on Zeus. "You are me," he whispered. "You will become what you destroy." Zeus's voice was quiet, but it carried through every corner of the trembling hall. "Perhaps," he said, "but unlike you, Father, I will not be ruled by fear." Thunder rolled overhead, not of weather, but of fate itself taking shape. Outside, the clouds began to swirl in unnatural motion, the skies turning crimson and gold. The world was awakening to conflict. Rhea appeared then at the entrance of the hall, her eyes filled with tears. She had felt it all, the liberation, the fear, the inevitable end of an age. Her voice was both sorrow and pride when she spoke. "The children of time have returned," she said softly, "and the world will never know silence again." Zeus turned toward her, and for a moment, the storm within him calmed. "It will know balance," he said, "even if it must be born from war." Outside, the first bolts of lightning cracked the sky open, splitting the heavens into light and shadow. Far below, the seas raged and the mountains shook as creatures of old stirred from slumber. The Titanomachy, the war of the gods, had begun to breathe, and as Kronos looked upon his son, his own reflection of youth, strength, and rebellion, a single thought haunted him. Time always repeats itself. The world did not sleep the night war was born. The air itself quivered. Oceans hissed against their shores, and mountains groaned beneath the weight of awakening titans. From the ashes of Kronos' pride rose a storm that would last 10 years. The Titanomachy, the war that tore heaven in two. It began with silence, the kind of silence that comes before a scream. Kronos, wounded but unbroken, rose from his knees and summoned his siblings. From the edges of the world they came: Iapetus, fierce and merciless; Hyperion, whose light could blind armies; and Atlas, tall as mountains, whose every step shook the ground. One by one, the Titans gathered around their fallen king, their eyes burning with fury and disbelief. "You would turn against your own blood," Kronos thundered, his voice echoing through the cosmos. "You, who owe your freedom to me." But not all Titans answered his call. Oceanus refused, retreating to his endless waves. Themis turned away, her scales trembling with dread, for even they knew time cannot be reversed. Meanwhile, Zeus rallied his siblings on Mount Olympus, the younger gods blazing with the light of a new order. Beside him stood Hera, her will unshakable. Poseidon, his trident gleaming with the roar of the sea, and Hades, calm and dark, carrying silence like a weapon. Above them, lightning coiled through the clouds, waiting for command. "Today," Zeus said, his voice steady, "we fight not for power, but for balance. Our father devoured the future to escape it. We fight so that all things, even gods, may be free." And with that, lightning struck. The first battle erupted across the plains of Thessaly, where heaven met earth. Kronos' scythe clashed with Zeus's lightning in an explosion that split the sky. Titans hurled mountains. Gods answered with storms. The sea boiled as Poseidon struck the earth, shattering valleys into rivers. Hyperion's radiance scorched the horizon, but Hades answered with shadows deep enough to swallow the sun. The world became an anvil, and time itself the hammer. From the depths of Tartarus, Gaia's voice echoed, weary yet unbroken. "Children," she whispered, "you fight not for me, but for the cycle you were born to uphold. Let the world remember what comes of fear." As the war dragged on, both sides faltered. The Titans, though ancient, were heavy and proud creatures of the old order. The Olympians, though young, were fierce and quick, born of suffering and struggle. Yet even Zeus began to see the futility of strength alone. The war had become a mirror, father against son, past against future, with no end in sight. Then, one night, as the battlefield burned beneath a starless sky, Metis came to Zeus once more. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp with urgency. "You cannot win by matching their might," she warned. "You must change the balance itself." "What balance?" Zeus asked bitterly. "Every strike is answered with another, every victory undone." "Then stop striking," she said. "Free those your father buried, the ones he feared most." Zeus's eyes widened. "The Cyclopes," he murmured, "and the Centimanes. Deep in Tartarus they wait," Metis said, "forgotten by both gods and titans. But if freed, they will remember who imprisoned them." It was madness, to enter the pit that even Kronos had feared. But madness has always been the price of change. That night, under a moon veiled by ash, Zeus descended into the abyss. The air grew thick and heavy, filled with the echoes of ancient pain. There, chained in darkness, he found them, the Cyclopes, their single eyes dim but still burning with divine fire, and the Centimanes, monstrous and mighty, each with 100 arms that trembled in the dark. "I am Zeus, son of Kronos," he declared, his voice cutting through the void. "I have come to end his reign, if you will rise with me." The chains shattered like thunder. The Cyclopes roared, their forges igniting in flame for the first time in eons. From their anvil sparks were born gifts to the gods. The thunderbolt for Zeus, the trident for Poseidon, the helm of invisibility for Hades. When Zeus returned to the battlefield, dawn followed him, though no sun yet rose. The sky itself seemed to glow from within as his lightning scorched the heavens. The Titans turned and saw what they had unleashed, the fury of gods born not from fear, but from purpose. Atlas charged first, wielding a mountain like a club. Zeus met him with thunder, each strike shaking the fabric of creation. Poseidon's waves crashed over Hyperion's flames, hissing like serpents in rain. And from the shadows, Hades struck, silent, unseen, inevitable. For 10 years the war raged, until even the stars grew weary of watching. But at last, on the 10th dawn, as Kronos raised his scythe for the final blow, Zeus caught it in his hand. Lightning poured through the blade, melting its metal, turning it to dust. Kronos fell to his knees once more, the same position in which he had once made his father fall. The sky itself seemed to sigh. "You have not ended me," Kronos gasped. "You have only become me." Zeus's eyes burned like suns. "No," he said quietly. "I have become what you were meant to be, the balance you feared." He lifted his hand, and thunder answered. The chains of Tartarus rose like serpents, coiling around the Titans one by one. Kronos struggled, roaring until the mountains cracked, but it was no use. The war was over. The age of the Titans had fallen, and as the earth swallowed its old gods into darkness, the heavens opened for the new. When the 10th year of war ended, the world lay in ruins. Rivers ran red with divine fire, mountains had been torn from their roots, and the very air still trembled with the echo of thunder. The sky was scarred by lightning, a reminder that even immortality bleeds. The Titans, broken and defeated, stood at the edge of eternity as the Olympians gathered before them. The battlefield was silent now, save for the slow cracking of cooling stone. Kronos knelt in the center, his golden armor shattered, his eyes still burning with the fading glow of his ancient power. He looked up at his children, at Zeus, radiant and calm, Poseidon, his trident humming with the pulse of oceans, and Hades, whose quiet gaze seemed to see beyond victory. For a long moment, neither father nor son spoke. Time itself seemed to hesitate, uncertain of its next heartbeat. Finally, Zeus broke the silence. "You ruled in fear," he said. "You caged the world in stillness and called it perfection. That age ends here." Kronos' laughter was hollow, cracked by exhaustion. "And what replaces it?" he rasped. "Another throne, another crown, another cycle." He tilted his head, blood trickling down his neck like liquid dusk. "You think you've broken time, boy, but you've only turned it." Zeus's expression didn't change. "Then let this be its turning point." He lifted his hand. The earth trembled. From the depths below, the ground split open into a vast chasm, a void so deep that light itself bent around it. From its depths came a sound like 1,000 sighs, the prison of the eternal, Tartarus. The air thickened as its gates appeared, forged of black fire and shadow. The Titans recoiled, even the mightiest among them trembling at the sight. They knew that what awaited within was not death, but forever. Zeus spoke again, his voice heavy with both judgment and sorrow. "Those who stood by our father's cruelty shall share his fate. Let them dwell in the dark until memory forgets their names." Atlas, defiant even in defeat, spat upon the ground. "You claim justice, yet speak like a tyrant," he growled. "You are no different from him." Zeus turned to him, eyes like stormlight. "Perhaps not, but I will not chain the sky in fear, only in balance." He gestured, and the chains of Tartarus rose like serpents of molten iron, wrapping around the Titans one by one. Iapetus cried out as the weight of the void dragged him downward. Hyperion's light sputtered and dimmed. Ceus and Crius vanished into shadow. And when Atlas resisted, Zeus pointed toward the western horizon. "For your pride," he said, "you will bear the heavens upon your shoulders, so they never again fall upon the earth." Atlas roared, but the sky bent down upon him, crushing his defiance into eternal silence. His punishment would become a symbol for all who sought to carry the weight of rebellion without purpose. Finally, Zeus turned to Kronos. The Titan King's breath was ragged, his power fading. Yet his eyes, dark and endless, still held defiance. "You can chain me," Kronos whispered, "but you cannot chain time. Even in darkness, I will move through every heartbeat, every shadow. I will be in the silence between your thunders." Zeus knelt before him. "Then let the silence teach you what fear never could, patience." With a single gesture, lightning struck. The chains coiled around Kronos, glowing white-hot as they bound his wrists, his throat, his heart. He was lifted, screaming, into the air, then pulled downward, vanishing into the chasm below. The gates of Tartarus slammed shut with a sound that shook creation. And for the first time since the dawn of the cosmos, the world was quiet. The Olympians stood together, their faces reflecting the light of the new dawn. Hestia wept softly, not from sorrow, but from release. Hera gazed into the horizon, where the first mortals stirred. Poseidon's eyes turned toward the sea, and Hades lingered at the edge of the chasm, listening to the echoes below. Zeus remained still, the sky slowly brightening above him. The storm had passed, but his heart felt heavy. Victory, he realized, is never clean, only necessary. He looked to his siblings. "We will rule not as tyrants," he said, but as stewards of the balance. The earth will breathe again, the sea will move, and even the underworld shall have meaning. Let each of us guard our realms not as kings, but as keepers. And as the wind carried his words across the wounded land, the first rays of light touched the horizon, soft, gold, forgiving. The age of Titans sank into the abyss. The age of Olympians had begun. The thunder had quieted, but its echo still lived in the bones of the earth. From the ashes of war rose a dawn the world had never seen before. The air shimmered with possibility, the scent of wet stone, fresh soil, and something else entirely, renewal. The Titans had fallen into shadow, and for the first time, the heavens belonged to new gods. Zeus stood upon Mount Olympus, the mountain newly awakened, its peaks piercing the clouds like blades of marble and light. Around him stood his brothers and sisters, the first council of the Olympians. Their bodies still bore the dust of battle, their eyes the gleam of both victory and uncertainty. For though the war was won, what came next would define eternity itself. Balance, Zeus said softly, his voice still carrying thunder. That is what we fight for and what we must protect. The Titans ruled by fear, believing that to control was to preserve. But we will rule by harmony, the order that allows all things to exist. He turned toward his brothers. The world must be divided, so it may never again fall into stillness. Hades nodded first, his expression calm, his shadowed form steady as stone. The underworld shall be mine, he said. I will guard what lies beyond life, not as punishment, but as purpose. There will be peace in rest. Poseidon's eyes gleamed like the sea at dawn. Then I will claim the oceans, he declared. Let my waves remind mortals that power can cradle or destroy, depending on the hand that wields it. Zeus raised his hand to the sky. And I will take the heavens, he said. The storm, the wind, the light. Let thunder never again be a weapon of fear, but a voice that speaks balance into chaos. The three brothers clasped hands, sealing the fate of the cosmos. From that moment, the world knew its divisions: sky, sea, and underworld, all bound by the thread of harmony. Their sisters took their places as well. Hestia, calm and kind, vowed to tend the eternal flame that would burn at the heart of Olympus, the symbol of unity. Demeter, her touch still fragrant with the promise of grain, would govern the harvests, teaching mortals to nourish themselves from the gifts of the earth. And Hera, regal and sharp-eyed, would become the guardian of order and devotion, binding oaths and hearts alike. When their thrones were raised, Zeus looked out across creation. The land below, still scarred by war, began to heal. Rivers flowed freely again. Flowers returned to the valleys, and mortals, small, fragile, yet full of wonder, began to lift their eyes to the heavens once more. But even as peace settled upon the world, shadows lingered beneath it. In the silence after the storm, Zeus often found his gaze drawn toward the horizon, toward the place where Tartarus yawned unseen. He could still feel the faint tremor of Kronos' chains below, like the pulse of an ancient wound that refused to close. Late one night, when the stars gleamed cold and distant, he climbed to the highest peak. There, he spoke softly to the wind, as if it might carry his words to the depths below. "Father," he said, "I did what you could not. I brought an end to stillness. But I wonder, is this peace, or merely the beginning of another cycle?" The wind did not answer. Only the faint rumble of thunder far beyond the horizon replied, as if the voice of time itself had smiled in the dark. Zeus closed his eyes. "Then let this age begin," he whispered. "Let it be better than the one before." The next morning, Olympus came alive. The gods crafted their halls, shining palaces carved from marble and cloud. Nymphs danced through the mist, and the muses began to sing. For the first time, laughter returned to the heavens. Yet beneath that laughter was a quiet truth. Every beginning carries the shadow of its end. And though Kronos was gone, his legacy, the cycle of rise and fall, lingered in the heartbeat of every god who followed. As the sun rose higher over Olympus, its light spilled across the earth, golden and gentle. Mortals below felt it and lifted their hands in worship. To them it was warmth, life, and light. To Zeus it was something else, a reminder that even light must one day fade so it may rise again. Thus began the age of Zeus, not with thunder, but with calm, the fragile calm between the pulse of eternity and the whisper of prophecy. Deep beneath the layers of the world, past the roots of mountains and the molten veins of the earth, lay a silence so heavy it could crush thought itself. There, in the endless dark of Tartarus, the defeated Titans slept, or tried to. Chains thicker than rivers bound their limbs, glowing faintly with the heat of Zeus's lightning. Yet among them one figure stirred, the fallen king Kronos, the father of time. For gods, sleep is not rest. It is remembrance. And for Kronos, remembrance was torment. Every dream replayed the same moments. His rebellion, his rise, his fear, and his fall. He saw himself devouring his children, his eyes wide with terror of the prophecy that had now come true. In his dreams, the world still trembled under his hand, golden, eternal, unchanging. But even there, he could not silence the voice that haunted him. You are the child of your own curse. He drifted between memory and madness, lost in the echo of what he had been. Sometimes he dreamed of Rhea, her gentle face turned away, her eyes filled with both sorrow and pity. Sometimes he saw the faces of his children, the ones he had swallowed and then birthed again in agony. And sometimes he saw Zeus, standing above him not with hatred, but with the calm of inevitability. It was this that tormented him most. The calm, the understanding, the mercy. For mercy was something Kronos had never known. Around him, the other Titans groaned and muttered in their own nightmares. Iapetus whispered to himself about lost battles, Hyperion cursed the fading of his light, and Atlas, even beneath the weight of the sky, sometimes called his brother's name like a wounded soldier dreaming of home. But Kronos did not call for anyone. He listened to the heartbeat of the world above, faint yet steady, and in that rhythm he began to hear something unexpected. Growth. Time, though chained, still moved. Flowers still bloomed. Mortals still lived and died. The rivers still flowed. The stars still turned. Even from his prison, Kronos could feel it, the pulse of life continuing, the world shaping itself without him. It was not still. It was not perfect, but it was alive. That realization pierced him deeper than any chain. For the first time, the Titan King began to understand the flaw in his rule. He had sought to freeze the world to preserve it, to stop its decay. But in doing so, he had killed what made it divine. He whispered to himself, voice faint as dust, to stop time is to end life. And for the first time since his fall, Kronos wept. The tears that fell from his eyes turned into sparks of gold that floated through the darkness like dying stars. The other Titans watched in silence, awed and uncertain. The Father of Time was breaking not from defeat, but from clarity. In that endless void, Kronos began to dream differently. His mind wandered through visions not of power, but of peace. He saw mortals building temples, offering prayers not from fear, but from gratitude. He saw Zeus, his own son, ruling not as a tyrant but as a guardian. He saw rivers running, seasons turning, the world moving in cycles that no god could own, only guide. For the first time, he did not rage against it. He began to whisper into the darkness, words carried by the faint currents that moved through Tartarus. The shadows listened, and in time, those whispers rose upward, carried by cracks in the earth, surfacing as dreams in the minds of mortals. They would not know whose voice it was, but they would call it time's wisdom, the voice that teaches all that nothing lasts, and that is its beauty. And so, even in his chains, Kronos lived on, not as a ruler, not as a god to be feared, but as an eternal truth. Far above, on Olympus, Zeus stood one night upon his throne, feeling a strange calm stir the air. He turned his eyes toward the horizon and whispered, "Father, are you at peace?" There was no answer, only the quiet ticking of eternity, a heartbeat echoing through the layers of the world. Perhaps it was imagination, perhaps not, but for a brief moment, Zeus thought he heard a faint voice from below, weary, gentle, and free of malice. "Guard it well, my son. Time is not yours to rule, only to honor." Zeus closed his eyes, and lightning rolled softly across the heavens. Not in anger, but in remembrance. The Titan slept again, no longer as a prisoner, but as a dreamer of the world he once ruled. Centuries passed, and the echo of the Titan War faded into legend. Mortals built temples to the Olympians, sang songs of thunder and sea, and learned to live beneath the rule of Zeus. Yet in the quiet corners of the world, in caves, in forgotten valleys, and in the hearts of those who feared the turning of seasons, the name of Kronos was still spoken. Not as a curse, not even as memory, but as mystery. For mortals, time was no god they could see. They could feel its breath in the wrinkles upon their faces, its rhythm in the beating of their hearts, its hunger in the withering of fields. Time gave and took without favor. And so, in the shadow of Olympus, a quiet reverence was born. A cult not of rebellion, but remembrance. They gathered at dusk, when the sun sank behind the horizon, the hour when day died but night had not yet risen. The followers of Kronos called it the hour between worlds, the moment when even gods hesitated to breathe. In this stillness, they whispered prayers not for favor, but for acceptance. Their offerings were simple: seeds, bread, water, and honey, the things that represented cycles, beginnings, and endings intertwined. They believed that by honoring Kronos, they honored the truth that nothing endures forever, and that this impermanence was sacred. The cult spread quietly through Greece, never seeking power or dominance. Farmers prayed to Kronos before planting their crops, asking for the patience to wait for growth and the humility to accept the harvest's end. Sailors invoked his name before long voyages, hoping for steady winds and safe return, or at least the wisdom to face the storms. And though Zeus's priests called such worship heresy, even they did not speak his name with disdain. For in the stillness between thunder and calm, every god could feel Kronos' pulse, the unbroken rhythm that underlay all things. In Olympia, an ancient poet once wrote, "He who devoured his children now feeds them, for all things born of time must return to it. And in that return, there is peace." No one knew who first wrote those words, but they spread like quiet fire. In Athens, philosophers debated his legacy. Some called him a monster, a warning of what power becomes when it fears the future. Others saw him as a tragic mirror, a symbol of mankind's own struggle against change. For even mortals, in their way, tried to hold on to moments, youth, love, triumph, only to lose them to the passing of days. In that loss, they felt Kronos. Yet perhaps the most remarkable devotion came not from priests or poets, but from the common people. Old women spoke his name when they buried the dead, believing the Titan carried souls gently through the folds of time. Mothers whispered prayers to him as their children grew, asking that time's passage be kind. Even craftsmen, as they shaped marble or bronze, murmured his name under their breath, honoring the patience required to turn chaos into form. And sometimes, when the harvest moon rose over the fields, entire villages would gather to celebrate the Kronia, the festival of time. There was laughter, feasting, and song. Slaves and masters dined together as equals, for in that moment, all boundaries dissolved. For one day, the world returned to the balance of the Golden Age, brief, beautiful, and fleeting. They did not worship him as a god of power, but as the keeper of truth, that every moment is borrowed, and that endings are not enemies, but reminders to cherish the beginning. Even the Olympians, in their high thrones, could not erase him. On certain nights, when Zeus gazed into the endless sky, he could almost feel his father's presence, not as a threat, but as a rhythm beneath creation, the ticking of eternity. In the quiet temples of stone, priests of Kronos carved a phrase above every altar: "He waits, not in vengeance, but in patience." And so the cult endured not as rebellion, but as reverence. For while the world prayed to gods of victory and strength, these few remembered the one who taught them that even gods must bow to time. And far below, in the depths of Tartarus, Kronos heard their prayers. He did not answer, but somewhere in the eternal dark he smiled. Long after the Titan's fall, the world learned to measure itself by rhythm, by sunrise and sunset, by seed and harvest, by the slow turn of constellations. And though few spoke the name of Kronos aloud, every passing season carried his memory like a shadow beneath the light. But there was one day each year when that shadow stepped into the sun. A day mortals called the Kronia, the festival of time. The festival began not in Olympus, but among farmers. It was born from gratitude, a celebration of the earth's patience, and of the God who once ruled when no one labored and no one starved. In the old tongue, they called it the day when the golden age returns. And for a brief, shining moment, it truly did. At dawn, the air itself felt different. The markets of Athens grew quiet. Masters untied the shackles of their servants. Merchants set aside their ledgers. Soldiers laid down their spears. On this single day, no one ruled and no one obeyed. The streets filled with laughter, with song, with the smell of bread and wine. Children ran through the alleys wearing crowns made of wheat, while old men toasted to the Father of Peace, their voices thick with nostalgia. They did not praise Kronos as a king, but as a reminder that even in toil, there must be rest. Even in ambition, a pause to remember joy. It was said that for those few hours, the veil between the ages grew thin. The whisper of the golden age could almost be heard again in the wind. Temples that once stood quiet all year opened their doors to everyone, rich or poor. In the heart of each city, a great table was set, long as a river, and upon it lay the gifts of the season: figs, olives, honey, and bread still steaming from the hearth. People who had once been divided by birth or fortune sat side by side, passing food with laughter that carried like song through the hills. As the feast began, the oldest among them would rise, lifting a cup of wine toward the sky. To Kronos, they would say, the keeper of what was and the promise of what will be. Then they would pour the first sip upon the ground, offering it to the earth, to Gaia, to memory, to time itself. But there was more to the Kronia than celebration. Beneath the joy lay reflection, a reminder that power and peace are not enemies, but moments in the same circle. As the sun reached its highest point, storytellers took to the plazas. They told of the Titan King and his fall not as tragedy, but as parable. They spoke of fear, of pride, and of how even the mightiest must one day yield. One old poet recited words said to come from the oracle of Delphi herself. To honor Kronos is to honor time, and to fear it is to waste it. The crowds would quiet then, their laughter softening into thought. For even in merriment, the festival carried weight. It was a mirror held gently before humanity, asking, "What will you do with the time you have been given?" As twilight came, torches were lit across the city. Families gathered around their hearths, and musicians played songs said to echo the harmonies of the Golden Age. The sound of flutes mingled with the hum of cicadas, blending past and present into one endless rhythm. Children fell asleep in their parents' arms, their dreams touched by the faint laughter of gods. And as night deepened, a silence fell. The people looked to the stars, those ancient witnesses, and for a moment, even the wind seemed to pause. It was said that during that breath of stillness, Kronos himself stirred in his prison of eternity. Not in wrath, but in memory. The chains of Tartarus did not break, but they loosened just enough for him to dream of sunlight again. The next morning, the city awoke to work once more. Slaves returned to their masters, merchants to their trade, and life continued its relentless pace. But something lingered, a kind of quiet reverence, an invisible promise carried in the hearts of those who had remembered the forgotten god. In the rhythm of their plows, in the laughter of their children, in the patience of the harvest, Kronos lived on. Even Zeus, high upon his throne, felt the echo of it. On the day of the Kronia, he would always turn his gaze toward the horizon, where dawn touched the sea, and whisper into the wind, "May time be kind to those who remember." And somewhere far below, in the depths of the world, the Father of Time smiled. Centuries turned like pages in a book written by invisible hands. Empires rose, fell, and rose again. Temples crumbled into dust, and from that dust, new ones were built. Yet through all these shifting ages, the symbol of the scythe endured, a relic of the god who once carved destiny from the flesh of the heavens. Archaeologists in later ages would find it everywhere. Carved into marble, etched on bronze coins, painted onto pottery older than memory. The scythe was always the same. A crescent blade, elegant and cruel, curving like the moon that watches but never speaks. To the unlearned, it was a farmer's tool. To the wise, it was a paradox, creation and destruction bound in one shape. In the beginning, the scythe had been Kronos' weapon of rebellion. Forged from adamantine, the hardest metal in the cosmos, it was the blade that severed the sky from the earth, ending Uranus's tyranny and birthing a new world. But with that same blade, Kronos committed the act that would define him, the devouring of his own children. That duality haunted mortals and immortals alike. Was it the tool of liberation or of fear, salvation or sin? In Athens, sculptors debated how to depict the Titan in their art. Some carved him as a wise elder, bearded and solemn, holding the scythe gently, as if it were a staff of wisdom. Others portrayed him as a monstrous figure, his jaw wide, his hands bloodied, the scythe dripping with divine ichor. Each version was true in its own way, for time itself is both giver and taker, and the scythe became its eternal metaphor. The poets saw this too. One wrote, "The blade that cuts the wheat feeds the hungry. The same blade cuts the thread of kings." Another said, "All gods fall to the scythe, and all mortals bloom beneath it." In every age, the symbol reappeared, reshaped but never forgotten. Farmers hung it above their doorways as protection from famine. Philosophers used it to explain mortality, sketching its curve on scrolls as a reminder that every life, no matter how long, bends toward the same horizon. Even in the temples of Zeus, where the Titan's name was seldom spoken, a faint image of the scythe could sometimes be seen carved discreetly among the decorative vines, a silent acknowledgement that no god escapes his father's shadow. But perhaps the most haunting relic of all was found in a forgotten shrine near the base of Mount Othries, the mountain that once held the throne of the Titans. There, buried under centuries of dust, explorers uncovered a mural painted in faded gold and red. It showed two figures, one Kronos, tall and radiant, his scythe raised to the sky, the other a young god cloaked in lightning, Zeus, his hand outstretched, not in battle but in understanding. Between them hung the scythe, floating weightless, dividing light and darkness. Scholars argued endlessly over its meaning. Some claimed it depicted the moment Kronos fell. Others saw it as a prophecy, that even the conqueror must one day surrender to time. But those who stood before it in silence often felt something deeper, something wordless, the uneasy peace between generations, between creation and ruin. For the scythe, they realized, was not merely a weapon. It was a mirror. To hold it was to see the truth of all things, that beginnings are born from endings, and endings make way for new beginnings. It was the rhythm of existence itself, the heartbeat of the universe carved into metal. In later centuries, artists would depict death as a figure carrying that same blade, cloaked, faceless, eternal. They did not know they were painting the echo of a god long buried, the shadow of Kronos reshaped by mortal imagination. And perhaps that was fitting, for the Titan who ruled time no longer needed temples or songs. His presence lived on in the symbols humanity created to explain what they could not stop. When a leaf fell, when a star faded, when a child took their first breath, time's scythe moved, unseen but constant. It was not cruelty, it was necessity, and high on Olympus, Zeus understood this too. In his halls, he kept no portrait of his father, no mention of the Titan's name. But in the quiet garden beside his throne, a single vine of gold-leaf ivy grew around a curved blade embedded in stone. The gods called it a relic. Zeus called it a reminder. Every so often, when thunder rolled gently across the heavens, he would walk to that garden, place his hand on the hilt, and whisper, "We all return to the blade," and in Tartarus below, where the chains of eternity hummed faintly, the Father of Time smiled in his sleep, for even forgotten gods find immortality in remembrance. In the golden halls of Olympus, laughter filled the air, the laughter of gods who had never known hunger, fear, or loss. Yet far from the feasts and thunder, on a lonely peak cloaked in mist, there walked a goddess who could not forget. Rhea, once queen of the Titans, mother of the gods, and wife of Kronos, lived in silence. The others called it peace, but for her it was mourning. She had seen every age, the rise of Uranus, the fall of the sky, the tyranny of Kronos, and the birth of Zeus's rule. She had birthed eternity itself, yet felt no triumph. Her heart was a battlefield where love and grief fought without end. Each dawn, she climbed to the same place, a ridge overlooking the world she had helped create. Below, mortals tilled the fields, prayed to the new gods, and sang songs that had forgotten her name. She did not envy their joy. She only listened to the wind, to the rivers, to the faint pulse of time moving through everything. It was her way of hearing him, Kronos. For though he was chained in Tartarus, his presence lingered like the echo of a forgotten song. Sometimes, when the wind shifted, she could almost hear his voice. Low, calm, and broken. Not the roar of a king, but the whisper of a man who once dreamed of peace and found only ruin. Rhea remembered the day she tricked him, the stone she had wrapped in cloth, the tears that had burned her cheeks as he swallowed it. She had saved her son, yes, but she had also condemned her husband. Every victory came with a loss, and hers was the loss of love. She would whisper into the wind, her voice trembling, "You were not only cruel, my love, you were afraid, and in your fear, you taught our children the language of rebellion." Sometimes she imagined he could hear her. One evening, when the sky turned crimson and the sun bled into the sea, Rhea descended from her lonely mountain to walk among mortals. Disguised as an old woman, she entered a small village where the festival of Kronia was being celebrated. The people laughed, shared food, and told stories of the old golden age. Rhea sat by a fire, watching a mother cradle her sleeping child. She smiled faintly. When the woman noticed her, she offered a cup of honeyed wine. "Drink, grandmother," she said kindly. "It's Kronos' day. May time be gentle to you." Rhea's eyes filled with tears. "May time be gentle to you." She had never heard a prayer more beautiful. Later, as the villagers danced beneath the stars, she wandered away, her bare feet brushing the grass. The air was thick with the scent of grain and smoke. Above her, the constellations glimmered, the same stars she had watched for eons. And for the first time in centuries, she felt something shift inside her. Not sorrow, not longing, but understanding. She realized that love, even divine love, was never meant to last forever. It was meant to change. The same force that had torn her family apart had also created everything that followed. The cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. The eternal rhythm of life. In that realization, her grief began to soften. She knelt upon the grass and whispered a prayer. Not to Zeus, not to the new gods, but to the one who still waited in the dark. "My husband," she said, "you are not forgotten. You live in every hour, every heartbeat, every sunset that ends and begins again. And though our reign has passed, our love remains. In the space between seconds." A soft wind brushed her hair, carrying the faint scent of rain. Somewhere, far below, the chains of Tartarus trembled. Not in rebellion, but in recognition. Rhea lifted her eyes to the stars. She could almost see him there, not as the devouring god, not as the tyrant, but as the young titan who once raised his sickle to free the world. The one she had loved before fear claimed him. When dawn came, she returned to her mountain. The sun rose behind her, spilling light across the clouds. From that day forward, flowers began to grow where her tears had fallen. White blooms that opened only at sunrise and closed at dusk. Mortals would one day call them Rhea's tears, believing they marked the forgiveness of the Earth Mother herself. And perhaps they were right, for in those petals lived the final echo of her lament. Soft, eternal, and at peace. The ages rolled forward like tides, washing away the memories of gods and men alike. Cities rose where forests once stood. Temples turned to ruins, and new faiths grew upon their bones. Yet one thing remained constant: time. Invisible, unstoppable, patient. And within its endless flow, in the dark chamber of Tartarus, Kronos watched. He no longer struggled against his chains. The war, the screams, the betrayal, all of it had dissolved into quiet understanding. The Titans who still stirred beside him sometimes cursed the Olympians, sometimes begged for release. But not Kronos. He listened, for deep within Tartarus, time itself whispered. Every heartbeat in the mortal world, every wave upon the shore, every falling leaf, he felt them all. They reached him as faint vibrations through the fabric of the cosmos, like the pulse of a world that refused to forget its maker. And so, while mortals believed him imprisoned, Kronos had never been more free. He drifted in thought, seeing through the eyes of centuries. He watched mortals build monuments to their gods, and then watched those monuments crumble into dust. He watched lovers carve their names into stone, only for the rain to erase them. He watched kings declare themselves eternal and vanish into history like smoke. Each rise and fall taught him something he had never understood as a ruler: that power means nothing without humility, and eternity means nothing without change. Sometimes, when mortals prayed, not to him but to the idea of him, he felt a faint warmth stir within the dark. They did not fear him anymore. They remembered him, a farmer blessing his field at dusk, a philosopher writing of cycles and endings, a poet whispering that even gods fade gracefully if they learn to let go. He was no longer Kronos the tyrant, nor Kronos the devourer. He had become Kronos the witness, the quiet observer of all things that live, die, and begin again. Above him, Olympus still gleamed, proud and untouchable. Zeus ruled with justice and thunder, Poseidon guarded the seas, and Hades kept the balance below. They were powerful, yes, but Kronos could see what they could not. He could see their weariness forming, their glory already beginning to rust beneath the surface of eternity. For even gods cannot escape the truth he had become. Everything fades, and yet there was beauty in it, the way mortals continued to hope, to love, to build, knowing time would take it all away. They were not cursed by mortality. They were blessed by it, for in their fleeting lives, every moment mattered. Every heartbeat was sacred, every goodbye eternal. Sometimes, when he closed his eyes, Kronos imagined walking once more among them, not as a god, not as a king, but as a shadow beneath a tree, watching a mother cradle her child, or an old man planting seeds he would never see bloom. He envied them, their courage to live without forever. Once, long ago, he had feared his children. Now he admired them. Zeus, with his stubborn will. Hera, with her pride. Hades, with his stillness. Poseidon, with his passion. He saw in them the fragments of himself, pieces of his own nature purified through suffering. Perhaps this was the true meaning of prophecy, he thought, not destruction but continuation. Every fall births what comes next. Every ending is an act of renewal. Far above, thunder rolled across the sky. Zeus's storm struck the horizon, and for a brief moment, lightning pierced even the depths of Tartarus. The flash illuminated Kronos' face, older, quieter, but still regal. For just that heartbeat of brightness, his eyes reflected not pain, but peace. "Do you see me, son?" he murmured into the void. "Do you understand now?" No answer came, only the soft hum of eternity, unbroken and infinite. Still he smiled, because he knew that one day the same silence would greet his son, and his son's sons after him. The silence that is not punishment, but understanding. And when that day came, when even Olympus turned to stone and the heavens grew still, Kronos would be waiting, not as a conqueror, but as a witness. Until then, he watched, always, patient as time, silent as truth. When the thunder of the Titan War faded into myth and the age of Zeus settled into calm, a strange silence filled the heavens. The world had order, the gods had dominion, and mortals had peace. Yet something vital was missing. Creation had grown too perfect, too still. The cycles that once gave meaning to life had begun to lose their edge. It was then that Zeus, sitting upon his throne of cloud and lightning, looked down upon the earth and saw that mortals were living without urgency. They did not cherish the morning sun, nor fear the coming night. They spoke of eternity as if it were a birthright. Their songs had no sorrow, their laughter no echo of time. They lived as shadows without shape, unchanging, untested, unalive. Zeus's heart grew heavy. He had fought to free the world from his father's tyranny, but in doing so, he had inherited a different kind of stillness, the same stillness Kronos had once mistaken for peace. He called for Themis, the Titaness of divine law, and for Moira, the weaver of fates. When they appeared, draped in silver and shadow, he asked them, "How can creation breathe if nothing ends?" Themis's voice was calm as wind over marble. "Without end, there is no meaning." Moira lifted her spindle, and in its threads shimmered the lives of men and beasts. "If you wish for life to matter, Father of Heaven," she said, "then you must let it fall away." Zeus listened, silent, and from that silence came a decision that would change existence forever. He descended from Olympus, walking unseen among mortals. For the first time since his reign began, he saw them not as worshippers, but as reflections, fragile, innocent, beautiful. They built homes, carved stone, planted seeds, and told stories under the stars. But they did so without fear, without wonder. He spoke then to the wind, and the wind became time's whisper, carrying his words through every mountain and meadow. "Let each life be measured. Let each heart know its season. Let each breath matter because it ends." And so mortality was born. It came softly, like dusk settling upon the horizon. The first mortal to die was not cursed but honored, a woman who had spent her days tending the fields, singing to the soil. When her breath ceased, the flowers she had planted bloomed brighter than before. The people who loved her mourned, but they also understood her time had not vanished. It had transformed. Death, they learned, was not an ending but a passage, a return to the rhythm that even gods obeyed. The fates spun her thread into the tapestry of the stars, and for the first time, Zeus felt the world breathe in balance. Mortals began to cherish what they once ignored. Every sunrise became a gift, every word, a legacy, every heartbeat, a prayer. Some of the gods questioned him. Hera feared that mortality would bring sorrow. Poseidon argued that it would break humanity's spirit. But Zeus stood firm. "Sorrow," he said, "is the shadow of meaning. Without it, there can be no joy." And though they did not understand then, the world soon began to hum with new life, not eternal but alive. Mortals grew wise through loss. They painted their grief in color, turned their fear into faith, and built monuments to those who came before. Each generation left behind echoes for the next, and in those echoes the gods saw something divine, a reflection of their own immortality, made fragile and therefore beautiful. Zeus watched it all and understood at last what his father could not. Time's power was not in what it took away, but in what it gave meaning to. Mortality was not a curse. It was Kronos' forgotten gift, redeemed. High upon Olympus, as the stars wheeled overhead, Zeus spoke softly into the wind. "Father, your cycle continues. The scythe no longer devours, it sows." And somewhere far below, in the heart of Tartarus, Kronos stirred. He did not wake. He did not speak. But the faintest smile touched his face, as if he too had finally understood. The gods would remain eternal, their stories unending. But from that day onward, the truest divinity would belong not to those who lived forever, but to those who lived fully. As the ages passed, mortals learned to mark the rhythm of their fragile lives. They carved calendars into stone, measured shadows with sticks, and counted the moons to name their years. Yet there was one symbol, simple and eternal, that would come to define their understanding of time: the hourglass. No one knew who first created it. Some said it was inspired by the sea, where sand flowed endlessly from one shore to another. Others whispered it was born from a dream, a whisper from Kronos himself, carried to a craftsman who had prayed for a way to measure meaning. Whatever its origin, the hourglass became a sacred object, a vessel of truth small enough to fit in a mortal's hand, yet vast enough to contain the wisdom of the gods. Its design was elegant. 2 glass bulbs joined at the neck, sand flowing from one to the other, endlessly, inevitably. Every grain represented a moment, a breath, a heartbeat, a memory. And when the last grain fell, it was not death, only renewal. The glass was turned again, and the cycle began anew. Philosophers stared into the hourglass as if it were an oracle. Some saw in it the story of creation itself. One bulb the past, one the future, and the narrow neck the fragile present that holds them together. Others said it mirrored the human soul, trapped between what has been and what will be. And for those who feared mortality, it was both comfort and terror. In temples dedicated to Kronos, the hourglass replaced the scythe as his new emblem. Priests would place them before his altars, the soft hiss of falling sand echoing through the halls like whispered prayer. "Behold the patience of time," they would chant. "The silent river that devours none but transforms all." Even in Olympus, the gods took notice. Hermes, swiftest of all, carried one at his belt to remind himself that even the fastest messenger could not outrun destiny. Hades kept one carved of obsidian in his palace, its sands black as night, a reminder that every soul must pass through the neck of fate before finding peace. And Zeus, though he never admitted it aloud, often stared at the hourglass that stood beside his throne, its sands shimmering like lightning. It was said he once told Hera, "Even kings must measure their reigns." But among mortals, the hourglass became more than symbol. It became teacher. Parents gave it to their children to teach patience. Sailors used it to measure the watch of the sea. Lovers exchanged it as a vow that their time together, though finite, would flow endlessly in memory. Still, there were those who feared it. To them, the falling sand was a reminder of loss, of how moments slip away no matter how tightly one tries to hold them. They called it the Eye of Kronos, and some swore that if you stared too long into it, you could see your own reflection age. Yet those who looked deeper understood the truth, that the hourglass is not cruel. It simply tells the truth no god or mortal can escape, that life is precious because it moves. In one story, an old philosopher asked his students, "What is the shape of eternity?" They guessed circles, stars, and spirals, but he shook his head and turned an hourglass upside down. "Eternity," he said, "is not endless. It is reversible." And in that simple act, the turning of the glass, the mortals of Greece learned the deepest lesson of Kronos, that endings are beginnings wearing different names. Over centuries, the hourglass traveled far beyond Greece. It appeared in Rome, in Egypt, in lands untouched by the Olympians' reach. Kings placed it on their desks, scholars by their ink, sailors by their maps. Even when empires fell and new gods rose, the symbol endured because time needs no temple. In the quiet of the night, when the world slept, even the gods seemed to hear it, the steady whisper of sand falling through the neck of creation. It was not a countdown, not a warning, but a promise that nothing truly ends. And far below, in Tartarus, Kronos opened his eyes. He felt it, the pulse of time embodied by mortals who now honored what he had once feared. They had turned his scythe into glass and his curse into wisdom. He whispered into the dark, "You have learned what I could not." And in that moment, even the silence of eternity felt like it was smiling. Night fell across the ancient world, soft and deep. The mortals slept beneath the stars, their hearts slowed, their minds drifting beyond the reach of reason. In that realm between waking and eternity, the realm of dreams, time lost its order. Mountains melted into sky, seas turned to memory, and voices from forgotten ages whispered once more. It was there that Kronos returned. No chains could bind him in this place. Here, in the fragile theater of mortal sleep, he walked freely, not as a god of terror, but as a shadow of wisdom. The mortals did not know his face, yet they felt his presence. He came to them in forms they could understand. A weathered man sitting by a river, a soft voice carried on wind, an old craftsman shaping stars from dust. His lessons were never spoken aloud. They came as visions, quiet, symbolic, unforgettable. A farmer dreamed of his crops wilting before their time, then blooming again stronger than before. When he woke, he understood patience. A grieving mother dreamed of her child laughing beside a golden field that had no end. When she woke, she wept, not from sorrow, but from peace. A scholar dreamed of an hourglass turned upside down again and again, realizing that no knowledge is ever lost, only passed on. Through dreams, Kronos taught what temples could not. That time was not enemy but teacher. That loss was not punishment, but passage. That even endings could be beautiful if met with open eyes. In the cities, people began to speak of the old man of the hours. They said he wandered through dreams to those who listened too closely to the ticking of clocks. They said he whispered truths no oracle dared repeat, truths too soft for waking ears. Artists painted him with silver hair and kind eyes, sitting beneath a tree that bore fruit and falling leaves at once. To children, he was a story. To philosophers, a riddle. To the faithful, a revelation. But not all dreamed gently. Some woke trembling. For Kronos' truth, though wise, was not without shadow. He showed kings the crumble of their monuments. He showed lovers the fading of their faces. He showed the proud the dust of their names. These dreams were not punishment, they were mirrors. For even wisdom must wear the mask of fear before it can be understood. One night, Zeus himself dreamed. He found himself in a vast field where stars grew like flowers. A figure stood before him, tall, cloaked in twilight, holding an hourglass that glowed like a small sun. "Father," Zeus said, his voice steady but uncertain, "you should not be here." "I never left," the figure replied. "You simply stopped looking." Zeus stepped forward. "You taught the world fear. You taught me to devour before I was devoured." "And what have you taught them?" Kronos asked softly. "To fight, to rule, to worship you so they forget what you cannot control." Lightning flickered in Zeus's eyes, but it dimmed quickly. "You were wrong," he said, "but so was I." Kronos smiled faintly. "Then you have learned my final lesson." The hourglass in his hand shimmered. "Everything turns," he said, "even the gods. When mortals dream of us, they make us live again. When they forget, we fade. That is our destiny, to exist only as long as we are remembered." Zeus reached out, but the dream began to dissolve, the stars scattering like grains of sand. Kronos' voice echoed as it faded. "When they dream of time, they dream of me, and through them, I am eternal." Zeus awoke before dawn, the sky pale and trembling. For the first time in ages, he felt small, not as a ruler, but as a participant in something greater. He stood upon Olympus, watching mortals stir beneath the rising sun, and understood. Even gods were but moments in the endless dream of the universe. From that night onward, mortals continued to dream of Kronos. Some saw him as comfort, others as warning, and others still as the voice that reminded them to cherish each breath. His temples may have fallen, his name may have faded, but in the soft theater of sleep, he ruled quietly still, the god who taught through silence. And so time itself became the greatest storyteller, weaving Kronos into every slumber, every heartbeat, every memory. For when eyes close and the world blurs, it is not death one meets. It is the whisper of the Father of Time, reminding all who listen, "You are fleeting, and that is your grace." Time, like the river it mirrors, never stops. It only changes course. Centuries turned to millennia, and the world that had once whispered the name of Kronos began to speak a new one, Saturn. The myths of Greece sailed westward across the sea, where Rome waited, eager to inherit the gods of its ancestors. But when the Romans adopted the Titan, they did not remember him as a devourer. They remembered him as a bringer of peace. In the Roman tongue, Saturn was not a monster chained in darkness. He was the god of sowing, plenty, and renewal. They said he once ruled a golden kingdom on earth, where no man owned another and no blade drew blood. To them, he was not the tyrant who swallowed his children, but the wise old god who taught mankind how to live. It was said that when Jupiter, the Roman Zeus, took the throne of the heavens, Saturn fled across the sea and found refuge in Italy. There, he wandered the fertile plains until he reached the banks of the Tiber River. The people who lived there welcomed the stranger, and in gratitude, he gave them the gift of agriculture, the secret of planting seeds, of turning soil, of understanding that every ending can bear fruit again. The Romans built him a home on the slopes of the Capitoline Hill, the Temple of Saturn, whose foundations still whisper through the ruins of Rome today. It was one of the oldest sanctuaries in the city, and unlike other temples, it faced west, toward the setting sun, toward memory, toward endings that gave way to beginnings. Within its walls stood a statue of the god, bound with woolen cords that were untied only once a year during his sacred festival. That festival was Saturnalia, the greatest celebration in Rome. For 7 days each winter, as the fields lay resting and the year prepared to turn, the order of the world was joyfully undone. Slaves dined beside their masters. The poor and rich traded clothes. Gifts were given, songs were sung, and torches burned through the long nights. It was said that during Saturnalia, time itself paused, returning for a brief moment to the balance of the Golden Age. Even Jupiter, high in the heavens, looked down and smiled. The Romans did not fear Saturn's power. They honored its lesson. His scythe became a harvest tool, not a weapon. His image, once terrible, was carved with gentleness. A fatherly face crowned with wheat, his eyes full of tired wisdom. To them, Saturn was not the enemy of life but its measure. Philosophers saw in him the embodiment of paradox, that creation and destruction were twins, that time both births and buries all things. Poets wrote that the god of time had not fallen from grace, but evolved. His shadow transformed into light through the memory of men. In every household, when Saturnalia began, candles were lit to symbolize the return of the sun and the renewal of hope. The youngest child of each family was given a small figure of Saturn carved from clay, a reminder that joy, like time, is fragile and must be held gently. As centuries passed, Saturn's name lingered even as the old gods faded. His temple became a treasury, his festival merged with winter's new faiths, and his face was painted among the stars, upon a planet so distant that it shimmered like a golden ring in the night. Astronomers called it Saturn, honoring the god who had once ruled the world and now circled endlessly above it, watching in silence. The poets of late Rome wrote that he had not been defeated, only transformed, that his chains in Tartarus had turned to celestial rings, symbols of wisdom earned through loss. One wrote, "He who once devoured the world now guards it, slow and patient, circling the heavens as the keeper of time." And indeed, when mortals looked through their primitive lenses and saw that distant golden sphere, they felt awe, not fear. For though Kronos had been feared as the devourer, Saturn was loved as the teacher. In this new name he found redemption. The god who had once ruled through fear was reborn through understanding. His myth had changed shape, but his lesson endured, that the flow of time cannot be conquered, only embraced. And so, as the stars turned over the ruins of Rome, Saturn shone softly, neither god nor prisoner, but symbol. The last whisper of the Titans lingered in his orbit, a golden echo of a truth older than civilization itself, that time is not destruction. It is return. The fires of Rome dimmed, centuries passed, and the gods faded into silence. Yet even in an age of forgotten temples and broken marble, one dream refused to die, the dream of the Golden Age. It whispered through empires and empires that came after, carried by poets, prophets, and weary souls who longed for a world without hunger, without cruelty, without fear. And at the heart of that dream, unseen but unforgotten, was Kronos, now Saturn, the sleeping promise of peace reborn. The Romans had believed the Golden Age was not lost forever, only resting. They called its return the Golden Return, the day when Saturn would rise again from his slumber and the chains of time would loosen. The earth would bloom without plow or toil, rivers would flow with honey, and men would live as brothers once more. It was not a prophecy of war or judgment, but of rest, a homecoming. Poets of every age returned to it. Virgil wrote of Saturn's rule, calling it the time before greed and iron and law. Later, dreamers and mystics spoke of an age that would come again, not through divine command, but through wisdom, when mankind, at last, remembered the harmony it had lost. And though Zeus or Jupiter no longer ruled the heavens in the minds of mortals, and Kronos no longer held a scythe, the idea of the golden return lived on. It passed from pagan lips to philosophers, from philosophers to saints, reshaping itself with every telling. For though the names changed, the yearning remained the same, the desire to go back to peace. Across the centuries, the world continued to turn. Empires rose and fell, crowns shattered, and the stars themselves were mapped by new eyes. But in every age, when men grew tired of conquest and weary of chaos, they dreamed again of Saturn's reign. Artists painted him not as a monster, but as an old god resting beneath a tree, eyes half closed, surrounded by fields untouched by time. In his sleep, he smiled not at glory, but at simplicity. And in their art, mortals revealed what they secretly knew, that the Golden Age is not a memory of the past, but a vision of the future. It is not behind us, it is ahead, waiting for us to understand it. The scholars of Alexandria debated the meaning of this myth for generations. Was the Golden Age a historical time, a lost paradise buried under the sands of memory? Or was it a metaphor, a reflection of the divine state that exists within every soul before fear and greed awaken? One philosopher, Cleon of Rhodes, wrote, "The Golden Age returns not when Kronos breaks his chains, but when man stops forging his own." His words were carved into stone and later lost to dust, but their truth lingered. For every time the world forgot kindness, it also remembered it, in songs, in stories, in the quiet acts of mercy that echo louder than thunder. And perhaps, in that cycle of forgetting and remembering, of falling and rising, the Golden Age was already returning, one heartbeat at a time. The myth of Kronos, once drenched in blood and terror, had ripened into wisdom. He was no longer the god who devoured his children, but the keeper of the lesson that even gods must grow. Mortals began to see him not as a warning, but as a symbol, that peace does not come from stopping time, but from moving with it. As the centuries turned, even the heavens seemed to acknowledge the myth's transformation. The planet Saturn, circling endlessly through the dark, became a beacon of mystery and calm. Its golden rings shimmered like halos of memory, reminders of an age when gods walked gently among men. Astronomers gave the planet his name, perhaps unknowingly completing the cycle. Kronos, who once ruled the world, now ruled the measure of the cosmos itself. Each orbit was a verse in time's poem, slow, precise, eternal. And when philosophers gazed through their telescopes, they often wondered if the gods still dreamed. Perhaps he did, not of conquest, but of balance, not of silence, but of music. For the hum of Saturn's orbit, faint and rhythmic, sounds not unlike a heartbeat, the pulse of time itself, old and patient. Some say that when mankind finally learns to live in harmony again, when compassion outweighs fear and understanding replaces pride, the veil between worlds will lift. The stars will shimmer as they once did, the rivers will sing, and the age of gold will dawn anew. And somewhere, beyond the horizon of time, Kronos will open his eyes, not to reclaim his throne, but to smile at what his children have become. All stories turn as stars do. The tale of Kronos, of rebellion, ruin, and redemption, was never meant to end, only to revolve. For time, like the god who once ruled it, moves not in a line but in a circle. Creation, decay, rebirth, each chasing the other forever, bound in the quiet hum of the universe. This was the truth that mortals would one day call the eternal wheel. The ancients first glimpsed it in nature. They saw it in the moon's waxing and waning, in the changing of the seasons, in the rise and fall of empires. Everything they built eventually crumbled, only to rise again in new form. Nothing truly vanished, it simply transformed. The philosophers of Delphi called it palingenesis, the becoming again. And so they wrote, "The gods die as men die, and yet both are born again." In this, they understood Kronos better than most gods ever could. For while Zeus ruled lightning, Poseidon ruled the seas, and Hades ruled the underworld, Kronos ruled the rhythm that binds them all. He was the pulse beneath existence, the tick behind every sunrise and every sigh. Even chained in myth, he still moved through the veins of creation, unseen but unbroken. The priests of the later ages represented this truth through a single symbol, a serpent devouring its own tail, the Ouroboros. They said it was Kronos reborn, the image of time consuming itself and giving birth to itself again. The serpent was not a monster. It was the most honest of gods. It admitted what no one else could, that endings are beginnings disguised as loss. The eternal will turned in everything. In the stars, in the heartbeat, in love itself. Lovers met, parted, and met again in other lives. Kingdoms fell so new cities could bloom in their ruins. Even death, feared by mortals, was only a pause between breaths, the wheel slowing, never stopping. One story told of a hermit who sought to escape time. He lived atop a mountain, untouched by the world below, meditating until his hair turned white as frost. One night, he dreamed of a vast wheel of light turning slowly in the heavens. As he stared, he realized that every spoke of the wheel was a life, his, yours, everyone's, moving outward, then inward again. When he awoke, he smiled for the first time in decades. To flee time, he said, is to forget that I am part of it. This was the lesson of Kronos, that nothing can escape what it belongs to. Even the gods came to feel the wheel's pull. Zeus aged in spirit, his thunder softer, his judgments slower. Hades grew more compassionate with every soul he guided. Poseidon's tempests eased, and his waves began to carry ships safely instead of smashing them. The world, once ruled by might, began to turn by understanding. But still, mortals forgot, as they always do. They sought permanence, monuments, kingdoms, names carved into stone, forgetting that even marble is dust in waiting. And yet, every time they forgot, the wheel turned again, teaching them anew. Flood, famine, renewal, rebirth, the old pattern never failed. In the twilight of the ancient world, a new philosopher stood before a crowd in Athens. He held up a golden disc engraved with a spiral and said, "This is not the end of the gods. This is their shape." The crowd murmured in confusion. He smiled and continued, "The gods are not destroyed when forgotten. They are reborn when remembered. And memory, like time, always returns." And so it did. Every age rediscovered Kronos, in new names, in new forms, but always with the same truth. The Hindus spoke of Kalachakra, the wheel of time. The Celts of Araun, the endless cycle of death and renewal. Even in far lands beyond Greece, his reflection appeared in myths of balance, always circling, always returning. It was as if the god himself had scattered his essence across cultures, ensuring that no matter what world rose or fell, his lesson would endure. The eternal wheel does not promise escape, promises understanding. It whispers to gods and mortals alike, "You are part of this turning. You have always been." And perhaps that is why, in every age, when humanity stands at the brink of forgetting itself, it rediscovers the old symbols, the serpent, the hourglass, the ringed planet gleaming in the dark, all reminders of what Kronos tried and failed to stop, that the beauty of existence lies not in its stillness, but in its motion. For motion is memory, motion is life, motion is time, and so the wheel turns, endlessly, gracefully, silently, carrying us all toward the same horizon and back again. The stories of gods had long since drifted into legend, but in the hush between eras, in the timeless gap between myth and memory, one tale was still whispered by poets. It was said that, at the end of all things, when the stars grew cold and even Olympus slept, Zeus descended once more into the depths of Tartarus. Not as conqueror, not as king, but as a son. The journey was unlike any he had ever made. The world above had quieted. Mortals no longer prayed, and the temples of marble were dust. The sea lay still, the sky dim, as though creation itself waited to exhale. With each step downward, Zeus's thunder dimmed, his light folding inward until it became only a glow, faint, human, humble. He reached the gates of Tartarus, still sealed by chains forged from lightning. With a touch, they opened, not in defiance, but in recognition. The god who had once ruled heaven now entered the realm of the one who had ruled time. There, in the endless dark, sat Kronos. He no longer looked like a monster or a god. His form was vast but quiet, like a mountain at rest. The golden fire that had once blazed in his eyes had faded to a gentle amber, and his voice, when he spoke, trembled with the softness of wind through old stone. "Have you come to finish what you began?" he asked. Zeus shook his head. "No, I have come to understand." The silence that followed stretched long, the silence of centuries collapsing into a single heartbeat. Then Kronos smiled faintly. "You look older," he said. "So do you," Zeus replied. They both laughed, softly, almost in disbelief, the sound echoing through the void like the first drop of rain after drought. Zeus sat before his father, setting aside the weight of his crown. "I once thought victory meant ending what came before," he said. "But now I see that nothing ever ends. You still move through the world, in their clocks, in their hearts, in the turning of the earth." Kronos nodded. "Time cannot die, only change its name." For a while neither spoke. The air pulsed with the rhythm of eternity, steady and unbroken. Then Kronos said, "I feared you because I feared change. I thought if I could freeze time, I could save the world from loss. But I only killed what I sought to protect." Zeus looked down, his hands resting on his knees. "And I feared becoming you. I ruled through order, through thunder, believing I could balance what you broke. But in doing so, I forgot why you once fought. Not for power, but for freedom." Kronos' gaze softened. "Then perhaps we were never enemies, only mirrors, each showing the other what he refused to see." Zeus raised his head, and for the first time, there was no pride in his eyes, only understanding. "Maybe that is what prophecy truly meant. Not that I would destroy you, but that one day I would see myself in you." Kronos smiled again, weary, wistful. "And when you do, the cycle ends." Zeus frowned slightly. "Ends?" Kronos lifted a hand, gesturing to the faint glimmer of stars far above them. "When father and son forgive each other, time itself can rest. The wheel slows, not from weakness, but from peace." In that moment, Zeus understood. All of it, the war, the rebellion, the prophecy, had been leading here, not to vengeance, but to reconciliation. He rose, reaching out his hand. Kronos hesitated, then took it. Lightning and time intertwined, light meeting shadow, the past touching the present. For a single heartbeat, the chains of Tartarus turned to dust, dissolving like mist in sunlight. The universe shuddered, not in fear, but in release. The stars brightened, the rivers of the underworld stilled. Even the hourglass of existence seemed to pause, its last grain hanging weightless in the air. Kronos looked at his son and said, "Go now. The world no longer needs gods, but it will always need time." Zeus nodded, "And it will always remember its father." As he turned to leave, Kronos' voice echoed after him, gentle and infinite. "Tell them that even the devourer of time can learn to cherish a single moment." When Zeus ascended, the gates of Tartarus closed behind him, not as prison, but as tomb, a resting place for a god who had finally found peace. The heavens stirred once more, and from that day forward, every dawn was said to carry a faint golden hue, the color of forgiveness. And in that light, unseen but felt, the Father of Time watched, not as ruler, not as prisoner, but as guardian. In the shadowed lands beyond life, where silence wears the voice of water, there flows a river older than the gods. This current is neither fast nor slow, it simply is. Mortals who cross into Hades' realm meet it first, shimmering like glass beneath the dim light of eternity. The ancients called it Lethe, the river of forgetting. But beside it, veiled in mist and mystery, runs another stream, lesser known, yet infinitely more powerful. Mnemosyne, the river of memory. It is said that when the first soul entered the underworld, the waters of these two rivers whispered to one another. Lethe promised peace through forgetting, Mnemosyne promised freedom through remembrance, and between them stood the truth of all existence, that life and death, joy and sorrow, cannot be separated. Kronos, even bound in his quiet eternity, watched these rivers with reverence. For in their flow he saw the twin faces of time, one that erases and one that preserves. Every drop of Lethe carried the weight of mercy, a release from pain, regret, and grief. Every drop of Mnemosyne carried the brilliance of meaning, the story that endures after the body is gone. Together they formed a perfect paradox, and in that paradox the god of time saw his final reflection. Mortals who came to the underworld were offered a choice: drink from Lethe and forget all that was, or drink from Mnemosyne and awaken with memory intact, to live again, burdened by wisdom. Most chose forgetting. They longed for silence after the noise of life. But a few, the poets, the seekers, the restless, knelt at Mnemosyne's edge and drank deeply. When they returned to the world above, reborn, they carried within them flashes of past lives, fragments of faces, echoes of laughter, the scent of long-dead summers. These were the dreamers, the storytellers, those who seemed to remember things they could never have lived. And so, through memory, Kronos continued to exist, not as a god demanding temples, but as a whisper in the blood of every soul who had ever lived before. When a child learned the names of the stars, when a poet wrote of lost love with inexplicable familiarity, when an old man dreamed of a place he'd never seen, that was Mnemosyne, and through her, Kronos' eternity flowed still. For memory is time's gentlest rebellion. It defies Lethe, defies death, defies oblivion. Through memory, even what is gone still breathes. The philosophers of Eleusis, who worshipped the mysteries of death and rebirth, understood this truth well. Their initiates were said to drink from Mnemosyne's stream, believing that memory, not forgetting, led to salvation. To remember, they taught, is to become divine, and perhaps they were right, for memory binds mortals to the gods, the past to the future, and every heartbeat to eternity. It is the thread that weaves the tapestry of existence, ensuring that nothing, no love, no lesson, no life, is ever truly lost. Kronos watched as the rivers wound their way through Hades' realm, their currents brushing against his sleeping form in Tartarus. Each ripple carried a whisper of remembrance, the laughter of his children, the cries of battle, the quiet prayers of mortals invoking his name in half-forgotten rituals. Though he had faded from their temples, he lived in their thoughts. And perhaps he thought that is immortality, not to be worshipped but to be remembered. One night, the fates themselves approached the twin rivers. Clotho, who spins the thread of life, dipped her spindle into Mnemosyne's waters. Lachesis, who measures destiny, watched as droplets fell like stars. Atropos, who cuts the thread, gazed into Lethe's reflection and sighed. "It is not the cutting that ends a life," she said, "but the forgetting." From that night on, the fates decreed that every soul would carry a spark of both rivers within them, the power to remember and the mercy to forget. Without both, existence could not balance. When mortals dream of loved ones long gone, it is said that their tears flow into Mnemosyne. When they let go of pain, their sighs drift into Lethe. Between them lies the human heart, fragile, finite, and endlessly turning. And in that space between remembering and release, the essence of Kronos lingers. He is there in every memory that refuses to die, in every story retold across generations, in every quiet moment when someone closes their eyes and feels the pulse of time moving through them. Because memory, unlike time, does not devour, preserves. It is the antidote to oblivion, and the truest proof that even gods who fall can still endure. So when mortals stand at the edge of the world and whisper the names of their ancestors, or when they tell stories of gods long faded from the sky, the rivers flow brighter. Lethe and Mnemosyne shimmer together, one cleansing, one remembering, and somewhere in that sacred harmony, the Father of Time smiles. Far from the marble roads of Athens, beyond the reach of empire and empire's dust, lies a valley shrouded in mist, a place that appears on no map and yet appears in every legend. Travelers who wander too far into the high hills of Delphi whisper of it in hushed tones. A ruin where time itself slows to a breath. Locals call it the Hollow of the Hours. Scholars, in their careful language, name it the last temple of Kronos. Few have ever found it, and fewer still have returned unchanged. Those who have tell of a structure carved directly into the mountain's heart. Its columns cracked but unfallen. Its air thick. With stillness. No bird sings there. No wind dares stir. Even the sun hesitates at its threshold, as if unwilling to wake whatever sleeps within. At the center of that silent hall stands an altar of black stone, veined with gold that pulses faintly, not with fire, but with rhythm. If one listens long enough, they say, the sound can be heard. A soft, steady heartbeat. It is not the heart of a god, nor of the earth, but of time itself. Around the altar are carvings, older than Greek, perhaps older than language. They show a figure with a curved blade, standing between two rivers. One hand holds a seed, the other a flame. Above him is the inscription, "He who ends also begins." For centuries, pilgrims came seeking answers. Some asked for visions of the past, others for glimpses of the future. But the temple offered neither. Those who entered found only silence and reflection. A mirror in stone that showed not faces, but moments. A child's laughter, a lover's goodbye, the first sunrise, the last breath. They would leave in tears, not from fear, but from understanding. The temple, it seems, was never meant to reveal Kronos' power, only his truth. In its shadow, time behaves strangely. Candles burn without melting. Water ripples without sound. A traveler once dropped a ring upon its steps, and it was said to fall for 3 days before touching the ground. Yet those who linger too long describe an overwhelming peace, as though the weight of years simply dissolves. One story tells of a young philosopher named Lysanor, who journeyed from Athens in search of the secret of eternity. He found the valley after years of wandering and entered the temple alone. For 7 days he did not emerge. When he finally stepped out, his hair had turned silver, but his eyes were clear and calm. He returned to the city, burned his books, and said only this: "The god of time does not live in clocks or stars. He lives in the pause between them." After that, he never spoke again. Centuries later, when war and empire consumed Greece, the temple was lost. Earthquakes swallowed it, vines smothered it, and history forgot its path. Yet sometimes, shepherds in the highlands claim to hear faint chimes at dusk, like glass turning over, or sand sliding through an unseen hourglass. And for a moment, everything, wind, heart, world, stops. Then the sound fades, and time moves once more. Those who have studied the myth of the last temple believe it to be symbolic, an allegory for humanity's relationship with time. But there are others, quiet and careful, who think differently. They believe the temple is real, hidden behind a veil that only appears to those who need it most. To the lost, the grieving, the ones who no longer fear the end. For it is said that within the temple, beneath the cracked altar, lies not a relic but a resting god. Kronos, no longer devouring, no longer watching, simply waiting. His scythe rests beside him, its blade dulled, its purpose fulfilled. Around him, grains of sand float in the air, caught forever in suspension, neither falling nor still. He does not dream now, he remembers. Every life, every death, every story ever told. They are his heartbeat, slow, eternal, kind. And perhaps that is why those who stand within his temple leave changed. Because for one fleeting instant, they touch the truth no philosopher can write, no priest can preach. That time is not our enemy. It is our witness. When the last pilgrim departs and the mist closes once more around the mountain, the temple breathes, a soft exhale that becomes the dawn wind sweeping across the Aegean. And somewhere in that golden light, the world begins again. At the edge of all creation, where light dissolves into silence and the stars fade into memory, there is a place where time no longer moves, it listens. There, in the hush between the last heartbeat and the first dawn, Kronos waits. Not chained, not feared, simply present. The universe hums around him, endless and alive. Every galaxy, every flame, every soul that has ever lived turns slowly in his orbit. He does not rule them now, he reflects them. His eyes, once fierce and golden, have become like deep water, holding the shimmer of everything that ever was. He is no longer the god who devours, nor the tyrant who trembled before prophecy. He is the quiet companion of all endings, the unseen presence in every goodbye, the soft ache that follows joy, not to take it away, but to remind us that it was real. When mortals look upon the night sky and see the faint halo of Saturn's rings, they are unknowingly looking at him. The echo of his patience turned to light. His silence has become the rhythm by which all things live. Some say that when the final flame of the cosmos flickers out, when the gods themselves have grown weary of eternity, Kronos will rise from his stillness and open his hand. In that hand will be a single grain of sand, the last second of the universe. He will hold it, admire it, remember it, and then, with infinite tenderness, he will let it fall. From that falling grain, time will begin again. Because the truth Kronos has come to understand, the truth even Zeus could not grasp, is that endings are not erasures. They are beginnings remembered, and so he waits. He waits in the silence between your breaths. He waits in the pause between your thoughts. He waits in the space between heartbeats, in the long exhale of the world when day turns to night, not as punishment, not as judgment, but as proof that nothing, no love, no moment, no soul is ever truly lost. Mortals fear time because they think it takes, but Kronos knows it only transforms. He watches as children become elders, as stars die and are reborn in the dust of their own light. He sees it all as one motion, an endless circle of becoming. And in that endless turning, he finds peace. The poets were right to call him Father Time, but they did not know how gentle a father he became. He does not rush his children anymore. He lets them grow, stumble, dream. He gives them every second, not to hoard, but to live. When the last temple fell, when his name faded from stone, Kronos did not vanish. He simply stepped back, into the background of existence, content to be unseen. He is the pulse in every clock, the whisper in every wave, the shadow of every sunrise, the god of waiting, the god of patience, the god of remembering. And perhaps, as you hear this story, as you feel the slow pull of breath and time, he is waiting for you too. Not at the end, but beside you, quiet and kind, watching you live the seconds he once feared to lose. For that is his redemption, not to rule the ages, but to witness them. To see every fleeting life as a masterpiece of motion, a brushstroke on the canvas of eternity. And so the Father of Time does what he has always done best. He waits, not for power, not for worship, but for you to look up one night, see the stars turning, and understand you were never meant to conquer time. You were meant to dance with it. And as the last echo of Kronos fades into the stillness between seconds, may you find rest in knowing that even time itself is not your enemy. It is your companion. Close your eyes, drift through eternity's quiet rhythm, and dream well, traveler, until the next story calls.